Thank you, folks, for attending. This is the kickoff meeting of the Node Bootstrapping Working Group. We're part of the Cluster API CNCF project, and by that, we adhere to the CNCF Code of Conduct. Please be nice to each other. I think for the time being, it's fine to speak up when you want to speak up. If things get too busy, then we'll introduce the please hold your hands up rule that we have in Cluster API. All right. Let me find the right browser window to share. I'm sure it's somewhere. 1 second. I should have prepared better, probably. Here we go.
It's just like standard meeting, beginnings. So it's all good.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're looking. Oh, everybody's there already. I'm late to the document. Nice. I tried to capture everything in the working group minutes document. For now, we can split it into multiple documents if the need arises. So I'm gonna share that to get started. If I find the button here, there's the button. Screens. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this is nice. I haven't shared in Zoom for some time, so you can do this now. Okay. So if everything works out, the document should be like behind me.
It is.
Yep.
It is.
Yep.
Very nice. Okay.
Fancy.
I like playing with stuff. Okay, so just a brief, because this is like the very first meeting that we have in this working group, which doesn't exist yet because the PR is still in review, which is fine. Brief intro to the minutes document. So I have a housekeeping section, which I'm planning to keep up to date with something that we things that we plan, things that we promise. So we have kind of persons of contact here. And maybe even ETAs if people want to commit to that. We have a number of like lanes or work streams or tracks that we probably want to keep an eye on every now and then, and I try to split that here. Took most of that from our previous discussions and from the feedback on the PR. And I'll probably turn what we see here in the meeting minutes part into kind of a template, so we can copy paste it in successive meetings like we do for Cluster API, following basically the same structure. Everybody says hi, maybe voices their intentions on expectations of the meeting, which I think is a great kind of check-in. Then we go through to-dos and dones, and then we have the regular meeting, maybe review the tracks, maybe discuss proposals, and it's closing actions. If there are any new to-dos, you're gonna add it to the list of to-dos up there. All right. That's it. That's my little document for you folks to keep track, and I'll now stop sharing so people can say hi. Most folks know each other from the Cluster API meetings, so I think a good check-in would be to state like very, very briefly, 1 or 2 sentences, please. What brings you here, and what are your expectations from that meeting? Mathieu, maybe start with you.
Hello, I work in the Flatcar team, and I've been working on some cluster API providers to bring Flatcar support. And also I've worked on Ignition backward compatibility between Ignition v2 and Ignition v3 on Flatcar. What about you, Guillermo?
Hey, Guillermo, I work in AWS. We use Cluster API for EKS Anywhere. I'll wait later to say what my interest is in this group. I'm super new to this. I've been out of Cluster API for the last couple of months, and I just saw last week that you guys were doing this, so I just joined as a listener until I catch up to everything. Where are you, Mike?
Yeah, well, I'm Mike McCune. I work for Red Hat, and we are in the process of making a migration of OpenShift onto Cluster API, and Node Bootstrapping is a topic I'm interested in. Although we have a solution for this, I still think it's important to be here and see what's going on and hopefully, be part of the collaboration. So I'm looking forward to it. Jacob, how about you?
Sure. Hi, Jacob. I'm from Deutsche Telekom. We're doing a lot of bare metal provisioning, or running a lot of bare metal clusters rather. We're currently using Metal Cubed, and we're working on our own new provider that's only focusing on Red Hat, which is a protocol that you can use to talk to bare metal servers. And it's kind of difficult to properly do bare metal provisioning right now, and always feels like a workaround, because you have to do a lot of things that you don't have to do in cloud environments. So my goal here is to, find maybe a better solution for doing some or tackling some of those problems. Was luck that I found this because I randomly joined the CAPI meeting after like half a year of not being there. So sometimes I guess you have to be lucky. Kashif, I think. What do you?
Yes, hi. Let me find the right camera. Is that Hi, my name is Kashif. I am a maintainer at Metal Cube. We have a provider for bare metal provisioning, which Jacob said he's using, so we're happy about that. I work for Ericsson. I was pinged on this issue by Jacob. I must admit that I haven't actually gone through all the details myself. So for now, I just hope to be a listener and learn how this whole working group is actually progressing. All right, who's next? Or are we all done? I guess we all have
I go next.
introduced ourselves. Okay, sorry, Fabrizio.
Hi, Fabrizio, work for VMware Broadcom. We use Cluster API everywhere. I'm mostly here to help. I think the Matt is missing.
Yeah, I can go. I'm Matt Boersma. I'm a maintainer on CAPC, image builder, cloud provider Azure. I've been doing this for a few years, and probably like all of you, I'm just super happy to be able to get paid to do open source, but it also means our priorities can be kind of fragile. And so recently we've gotten essentially some more encouragement and push from Microsoft that yes, you're doing the right thing. So I'm trying to finally step up a little more in CAPI, maybe resurrect machine pools, and also obviously this Ignition flat car proposal is a huge thing that is coming essentially or largely proposed by Microsoft. So I want to be here to help however I can. Also, longtime CoreOS flat car fanboy, so I want to see it succeed wherever it can go. That's all.
I can go next.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
So my name is Mohammed. I work for a company in Germany called Ionos. We have been working with Cluster API since 1 year and a half. We maintain 2 Cluster API projects, providers. We have the provider for the Ionos Cloud, and we also have a Proxmox provider that we also maintain. I'm pretty happy to be part of this whole thing like node bootstrapping and separation of, provisioning kind of things.
Evan and Johanan are missing.
Yes, I was going to say I think I'm one of the last. So Evan Johnson, I work at Akamai, currently maintainer for Linode's Cluster API provider, which is a fairly new one on the scene. We're also very interested in using Flatcar, and I'm interested to start contributing more back to Cluster API. So looking for places I can jump in and help.
Hey, my name is Johanan Lieberman. I'm a fairly long-time contributor to Cluster API in general, various subsystems, both core and some of the providers, the infrastructure providers. However, in the past 2 years, I think I've done almost 0 contributions because of changing business priorities at my employer. I work at Microsoft, in case I didn't say that. I'm one of the original people who contributed the currently experimental ignition support that we have. So that's one reason I'm interested in this work group. I'm also Matthew and Thiele's colleague, even though I'm not on their team. So I'm related to Flatcar. I came to Microsoft through the Kinfolk acquisition. Kinfolk is the original, is the maintainer of Flatcar. We're still sort of a self-contained group at Microsoft. So I'm part of that group, not directly on their team. My hope is to figure out a good way forward to support not only Ignition, but any other provisioner that's not Cloud Init. So it includes Cloud Init, of course, but also other provisioners. And hopefully, well, ideally, I want to make I want to help make the project as flexible as possible in terms of combining bootstrappers, namely kubeadm, for example, or other bootstrappers with arbitrary combinations of provisioners. I realize that achieving that might be a long shot. So I'll be fairly happy even if we only manage to just find a good way forward to keep maintaining the currently supported provisions that we have without further increase of burden on the maintainers, because I know that they are lacking in resources. We're also here to help in that regard. So trying to ease the maintainership burden as much as we can. And yeah, I started working. I was not the first person to start working on issue 5294, which is the bootstrapping provisioning separation, but I think I'm the last person to touch it. There is a work in progress design proposal that's linked in the agenda document. It's not done. There is a lot of like brainstorming section at the end, which are just unorganized thoughts of mine that I didn't finish iterating over. But there are some, I think, decent sections there that if anybody has the time and wants to get some context, I think it's worth going over, even if we don't adopt the proposed design. I propose one specific design option there. It's definitely not the only one. It's what made the most sense for me initially. But yeah, let's remain open to other alternatives. I think the problem statement is still very relevant and pretty universal to whatever we're going to be doing here. So yeah, happy to answer any questions and help with anything.
Great, awesome. Thanks everybody for the introduction. Fun fact, I used to work for Ionos back in the day when they were still called Profit Breaks. So
Oh yes,
fun times. Are you
but
folks?
it's completely rebranded, you know.
Yeah, you folks still in the Prenzlauer Berg office, or did that not survive?
So now it's in Friedrichshain.
Ah, okay, that's okay. Still a nice area to be in. Awesome, great to meet Ionos folks. It's always amazing. All right, I had as a first agenda item to kind of agree on a cadence for the meeting series. For me personally, a good cadence would be fortnightly, so every 2 weeks. It would give us some wiggle room, particularly for the architecture part in the beginning, and maybe for one or two prototypes. If we agree on that series, I would actually try to get some concrete to-dos out of every meeting so we can track stuff, because a lot of things can get lost in a 2-week time span. So how do folks feel about that? I just make I get a thumbs up from Matt. Oh, Matt, by the way, is this conflicting with the CapZ office hours?
It is, but pardon me, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
We have other hosts. No big deal.
Amazing. Okay, that's great. Great to hear. Right. So yeah, let's do a simple majority thing. Everybody who thinks fortnightly is great and the slot works, just raise your hand or put up your hand, and I see thumbs there. Okay, that's definitely a majority. So let's call it a thing. Mike or Fabrizio, one of you have access to the Cluster API calendar? Because I'd like to get this meeting on the calendar then.
That's a good question.
That's a fun one. There are problems with calendar synchronization in community. I have to sync up with Lubomir, the SIG lead. Yeah, I will come back.
Gotcha. Okay, okay, perfect. I'd actually do know Lubomir from our CNCF incubation process. So yeah, would be great if you could figure things out. We probably don't need much in that invite except for the Zoom meeting and the link to the agenda. Mike?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, we had a similar issue with the Carpenter feature group. And I ended up just making a personal calendar item and then inviting everyone who wanted to be invited and kind of broadcasting that. It's
Okay.
not the best solution, but it's at least a reminder for people who want to be there.
I can absolutely do that. That's not it. Actually, this is what we do with the Flatcar community calendar right now. We're not even onboarded with the CNCF calendars. So yeah, I'll take that item.
Just like calendars are tough, you know.
Yeah. To do.
Yeah, and it's worked okay for the Carpenter feature group. I've had people who showed up later who wanted to be added, and it was, you know, they saw it. We kept putting it in the notes, and so people just reached out to me on Slack, and I just added them to the calendar.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, I can add the ICS of that calendar to the main copy doc, and then people can self-service.
Yeah, I mean, it would be awesome if, like, the, you know, SIG Cluster Lifecycle calendar was easier, or the, you know, Kubernetes calendar was easier to interact with, because yeah, like the discoverability is really cool. Then people are like, oh, I didn't know this was happening.
Okay, for nightly cadence. Awesome.
Yeah, just to give a little bit context, recently we even migrated from the old Google mailing list to the CNCF mailing list to try to solve the problem, but we still have problems.
So, I remember that. Yeah, there were like insanely many invites just flying around. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems that it's way more complicated than it should be. But this is what it is. So I will reach out, and then if we have a good solution, I will otherwise, you know, do it with yourself in this case is way better.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and then there's this insanely like crammed CNCF calendar where you get all of the invites, and then you have no, like, everything's just a mess. But yeah, anyways, okay. That's easy. Gonna do this calendar thing, and then we're happy. The second thing that came up, and it's the last housekeeping thing, after that we'll cut to the beef of the proposal, is the glossary. So we had a number of terms. I think we identified 2 terms already, which we want to use, which is operating system provisioning, for basically configuring the operating system of a node. And that includes configuring the node in a way that the operating system, you know, fits in there. So it's kind of a 2-part thing. It's mostly the second part, configuring the operating system for Cloud Init. But if you think about Ignition, it's also you can change the layout of the node, because Ignition runs in the init RD. So for instance, if you want to do crazy stuff with storage, you can actually do it in Ignition. So that's why we kind of settled to OS provisioning there. And the second is node bootstrapping, which is the process of creating a node and adding it to the cluster from the cluster API side. And there will be more coming. So my proposal for keeping track of that is we'll add a section to the meeting minutes, the agenda for the time being. It'll be a static section like housekeeping in the beginning. And then eventually it'll just be too much. And then I volunteer to make it a README and add it to the working group docs in the repository.
Just a note, I don't want to nitpick on term. I think that if we think at Cluster API users, they care to get the machine up and running.
Yes.
So we need a term to describe everything. Today is Bootstrap because it's Bootstrap provider. Okay. But yeah, we can change it. No, I don't care. Then if we talk in this group, we know that to get a machine up, there are two steps or two things that play together. One is responsible for the OS part, one is responsible for the Kubernetes part. But yeah, let's always think that we have the user view that should be single, unique, as simple as possible, and the technical view, which is as usual more complex. But yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. And that is a great segue to actually the main part of the kickoff, which is I at least wanted to start discussion on the architecture before we all disappear into the festive days, so we have something to digest over the time off. And I know that there has been a very lively discussion on the repo, on the PR for the working group. Mainly because my very first draft for the working group proposal was very much taken just from the architecture proposal, and that was exciting to see. So my proposed path forward would be, Johannan, if you can give us like a 5-minute bird's eye view on the current architecture. We have a base for discussion, and then I think Fabrizio and you can take it away and discuss. I will share that document so we have something to look at, but I'll leave the explaining to you.
Sure. I'm not sure which document that is, but I can definitely give an overview about the problem we're discussing. Oh, that document.
The Google Doc, yeah.
Oh, the proposal. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the proposal is very long, so we can definitely we definitely can't go through the whole thing, but we don't need to. So I think it was a good call to start with terminology. I'll repeat it very briefly because I have maybe some points to emphasize there. But Fabrizio, I accept your point regarding the user perspective. I think it's really important. So we do have, I simplified it as bootstrap and provisioning. The only reason I'm even bothering with terminology is because we seem to have, at the moment, at the current state, two concerns that are at least technically distinct, but highly related to one another. So Bootstrap is, I just took it from the glossary, turning a host into a Kubernetes node, for example, using kubeadm. And provisioning is just customizing nodes OS, for example, using Cloud Init. So I personally don't care too much if we say provisioning and then OS provisioning or whatever, as long as we remember that it's distinct from Bootstrap. That's the main thing. And the reason we've already quibbled quite a lot about terminology, at least the way I see it, is that because these two things are currently entangled, not only under the hood, but also in the API, as far as I can tell, these two concerns, things got to where they are now. So I genuinely think that because we weren't very careful with terminology and with distinguishing between these two concerns initially when designing the project, I don't know who that was. I wasn't part of the project back then, but I think that's the main reason why we have the current problem and why this work group is even necessary. So yeah, that's why I think we should be extra careful with distinguishing these two concerns. So I think it's enough about that. So we already have multiple bootstrappers supported, kubeadm being the main one, but there is at least officially a list of, like, I counted, I think, at least 8 ones. I assume most of them aren't in very broad adoption, but it's more or less guaranteed that kubeadm is the central one. And we have at least 2 provisioners supported. I'm aware of Cloud Init, which is GA, and Ignition, which is currently experimental. I've seen like a sort of a third-party repository with Cloud Base in it, which is a Windows provisioning system. I don't know to what extent it is actually supported and in use, but let's just put it out there that it exists. And maybe there are others I'm not familiar with in repos outside the GitHub organization. Now, the way I see it, the main reason for this work group is because we want to make it easy to develop and maintain provisioners. And I'm focusing specifically about provisioners because, as far as I can tell, that's the main issue right now that isn't satisfying in the way the project is being handled. So, for example, right now we have CABPK, so Cluster API Bootstrap Provider kubeadm, a very long acronym. Now, CABPK right now is defined as a Bootstrap provider, And as a subsystem or as an implementation detail of this Bootstrap provider, it also handles provisioning. What does it mean? It means that it reads CRDs, so Kubernetes API objects defined by the user, like the workload cluster template. And in these CRDs, there are various fields. Some of these fields are related to kubeadm, namely to the Bootstrap process, whereas other fields, sometimes in the same object, in the same CRD, are related to provisioning. So as an example, we have, let me look for that specific type, but I think it was kubeadm config template. Please forgive me if I'm quoting the wrong Go type right now, where in the same struct, we have things like join configuration and init configuration, which are official kubeadm terms. And we also have things like disk setup or users or NTP or things like that, which are cloud init terms. Now, maybe that's fine. Maybe the user doesn't need to know about the fact that we have provisioning and the fact that we have Bootstrap. But one thing that is definitely a problem, as far as I can tell, is that right now Bootstrap is tightly coupled with provisioning, also from the user's perspective. The user might not know that disk setup relates to cloud init and init configuration relates to kubeadm, but the fact is that right now it is implied just from the way the API is designed that if I'm choosing kubeadm as my Bootstrap, I have to use cloud init as my provisioner. Now, I could enable some feature toggles and then use ignition, but I think we all agreed, I mean, that's a main reason we created this work. We all agreed that this is not very maintainable right now. And in addition to what I just said, not only do we have a tight coupling between Bootstrap and provisioning in the same API objects, we also have a dependency of the ignition support on cloud init. So we have the two provisioners that we have, one is based on the other. I mean, literally based, like built on top of it in terms of like Go types. So this has multiple implications. For example, we cannot modify cloud init or ignition code without affecting kubeadm related code. The other way, vice versa, also doesn't work. So if we, right now, at the current state, right, if we're touching kubeadm related code, we might need to touch cloud init code and or ignition code. Simply stated, Bootstrap and provisioning are not orthogonal right now. Another problem is we cannot modify cloud init without affecting ignition. Here we have a unidirectional relationship because ignition is based on cloud init and not the other way around. We also, as a user, I cannot flexibly combine Bootstrap providers with provisioning providers. So right now we don't really have a provisioning provider, but let's say that I like kubeadm, everything is fine. I'm using, I don't know, Ubuntu as my host OS. That's why cloud init is my chosen provisioner, but now I want to switch to a Flatcar or Fedora CoreOS or something that uses ignition, but I still want to use kubeadm. But now I need to, I guess, swap my Bootstrap provider as well, because the only way to switch to a different provisioner is to change, again, right now, is to change the Bootstrap provider. So that's another problem. And lastly, provisioning right now, provisioning config is sort of abused by users in many cases who want to just perform generic OS customizations unrelated to Kabi Bootstrap. So for example, it's true that in the current state, CABPK would generate, let's say, a cloud init configuration that includes the commands to fire up the kubeadm binary and to do the whatever node bootstrap process. But maybe I also want to do disk setup, and maybe I want to do Linux user configuration and configure my NTP and do this and do that. So in some cases right now, some of the cloud init fields are exposed in the Kabi API, and I can change, for example, my NTP configuration through the kubeadm object, which I personally find a little odd, but let's say this is fine. But what if I want to do something that's not currently exposed? So we have two fields called pre-kubeadm commands and post-kubeadm commands, which are supposed to serve as kind of hooks, like before and after hooks for the Bootstrap process. And we've seen complaints by community users that these fields are currently being abused to just convey arbitrary cloud init snippets in a way that was not necessarily, the project was not necessarily designed to handle. And it's sort of like unchecked, unvalidated, and could even conflict with the Bootstrap process itself, right? Because what happens if I inject some custom cloud init code or ignition code that actually undoes something that the Bootstrap process needs? So These are the current problems that I'm seeing. And to me right now, the strategic question we need to ask ourselves, and I'm completely open to other questions as well, but I think this is like the crux and maybe already a point of disagreement that we have is, do we want to keep provisioning inside the Bootstrap provider, or do we want to break it out? And I think there are pros and cons to both. So I won't elaborate a lot on that. I think this is definitely material for the actual work streams that we're going to have. But very briefly, it's better to keep provisioning inside Bootstrap as we have today, for example, because it is less work. So it is simpler to just keep it as it is. And because there is no need to make breaking changes, which is, of course, important, backward compatibility and not disrupting users unnecessarily. But on the other hand, few reasons to actually do break the provisioning out is that it's going to be more flexible. Let's assume that we had the same way we have a Bootstrap provider today. What if we had provisioning provider? So an abstraction on top of provisioning that you can tie together to the Bootstrap process using something like Kubernetes references. This is basically what I propose in the design. So allowing users to flexibly combine whatever pieces they want. And then I think it's, well, I don't want to elaborate too much about that this option, because this is just one option that we suggested so far. But maybe one more thing I will say is, if we don't break the two out, then we might have a big combination of repositories over time that we need to maintain, because we're going to have a Cartesian product of all supported bootstrappers and all supported provisioners. For example, right now we have two provisioners, let's say, Cloud Init and Ignition. I want to use kubeadm, so I need two flavors of the kubeadm provider now. But now I also have K3s, so I need two flavors of K3s, et cetera, et cetera. And if I add a third provisioner, then it's going to be 3 of each. So yeah, that's it, I think. I would say last thing, I think in both approaches or in any other approach that we might evaluate, I think that orthogonality is really important. I think it should be a design principle that we should aim at. So try to make pieces as loosely coupled as possible so that they can be maintained and developed independently, and code reuse, again, as much as possible. So yeah, I think I'm gonna hold it here and let other people speak.
Well, maybe I'll just continue what I was saying in chat. Like in general, I tend to agree with what you're saying, Johan. And like I like the idea of separating these things in a way where you could actually have like pluggable pieces to it. But my like gut reaction hearing you talk about it was that, yeah, like the word provisioning is way too overloaded here. Because when we say we're talking about the provisioning, it's like, okay, well, like what is that everything from when the instance gets turned on to when it becomes actually a node in the cluster, or like, and even just being able to separate hardware provisioning or instance provisioning from operating system provisioning. Because like we're talking about, like our users are going to look at this and they're going to be like, wait, I always thought provisioning meant this one thing. And now there's all these, I don't know, like I was already confused just listening to you talk about it. And I know what you're talking about. So I guess I'm seconding what Fabrizio said earlier, that we have to be really careful about how we come out of the gate with this. But in general, I like the notion of making these things more pluggable. I'm not sure how we achieve it technically, but on balance, I like the idea.
So just one comment. I want to make sure it's very clear that whenever I said provisioning, I was speaking strictly about it's not even executing the Cloud Init or Ignition configuration. It is just generating that configuration, because it's true. For example, of course, we need to provision a VM. We need to create the VM in the hypervisor or whatever, turn on a bare metal server. In this context, I don't call that provisioning, because we have the infrastructure providers to deal with that, and therefore it is completely out of the scope of what we're doing now. So the demarcation points, as far as I can tell, for this working group is the moment we have Cloud Init or Ignition or whatever blob that we can store somewhere for the VM or server to consume on startup, then we're done. The rest is like infrastructure, and it's outside the scope of this work group. I don't know if people agree, but So that these aspects of provisioning the hardware, etc., and the hypervisor are, to me, completely out of scope. Creating cloud resources also completely out of scope. This is not what we're discussing here. Does that make sense?
No, right. Yeah, absolutely. It's just when we have a discussion about it, if I say provisioning, cluster API users are going to have a certain notion of what that means. And so I just want to be clear that even if we're using the word provisioning again and again, it's like we should say instance provisioning or compute provisioning versus operating system provisioning, right? Because we're provisioning the hardware and then we're configuring it for the operating system and then we're bootstrapping Kubernetes on it, right? So we do have 3 distinct phases that are happening here. And what we really want to target is the operating system phase. Like you've got your compute, there might be modifications that I need to make to the operating system before it's ready for Kubernetes, to be deployed there. And that's really the heart we want to get to here is like, how do we target that operating system component part?
Yeah, 100%. So if there is a term that's better than provisioning, I'm seeing that Matt is writing in the chat that he's also thinking about infrastructure whenever he hears that. I think I spent hours just writing and rewriting these terms in the design proposal, trying to see what makes sense. I'm completely on board with using a different term as long as we have 2 separate terms and we all know what the other is talking about when we're discussing things. If there is something that's going to be more intuitive to the users, if provisioning ever gets exposed as a distinct term or whatever, I'm happy to swap it immediately. I'm not attached to any of this.
Well, no, but I think this is how we advance the state of the art with Cluster API, right? Because we're emerging from a time when we combine these concepts together, and now we want to start talking about them separately. So when we want to have a conversation with our users about this, we want to be able to say there's the provisioning phase, there's the configuration phase, there's the bootstrapping phase, and they immediately know what we're talking about, and those concepts make sense to them, right? That's my hope, at least.
Cool. Any other questions or comments about everything we just said?
So for the glossary, I'm currently capturing 3 terms. The first is node bootstrapping. That's what we already know. It's the umbrella thing that happens from the cluster API side. And it's the process of creating a new Kubernetes node and adding it to the cluster. I have machine provisioning, which covers creating a machine for an operating system to run on. That can be as trivial as talking to an API of a cloud provider or a private cloud, which will create a virtual machine, or switching on a physical machine in a data center using BMC commands or whatever that entails. And then it's operating system provisioning. So that's configuring an operating system to run on that machine. Involves first-time and runtime configuration. So the OS basically can use that machine fully as intended by Cluster API. What's the bootstrap term?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. That's why I typed. I just wanted to say that we already have the bootstrap term defined in the official copy glossary, and it's actually a little different. It's not creating a node because that can be confusing. Like, do you mean the hypervisor? It's just turning a host, which is a server basically, into a Kubernetes node. So we can just use the official term unless we mean something different by bootstrap, I think.
Right. So what we're talking about is actually pre-bootstrap.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for. All right. Last tiny bit, and that's the worrisome bit for all of us. OS provisioning also involves, or might involve, user-supplied configuration that is kind of, tunneled or channeled right to the provisioner, and then lets the user do crazy stuff, like alongside what Cluster API is intending to do, which is fine and I think required. It also is configuration language specific, so the user needs to know I'm provisioning something that speaks Cloud Init or speaks Ignition, but I think that also is fine. Okay, Fabrizio, do you want to give some overview of your concerns with this approach and maybe briefly discuss the alternative approach that you were proposing?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I want to get this fixed as soon as possible. Let me say it is a problem that is lays around since years. Second, I'm not really concerned about the past. I'm concerned about the impact that we have on the user. So, and third, I really want that we don't over-engineering this, because it will be bad for not only for us but also for the user. So I started from the same point 3 years ago when we wrote down this issue. Oh, we have to split them. We have to make everything pluggable, and etc. etc. It didn't happen for many reasons, and I try to. And most of what I'm saying is probably my explanation of why it didn't happen in the last 3 years. So first of all, I think that the user doesn't care. They just want a machine to become a Kubernetes node. And honestly, while the combination of bootstrapper, provisioning, etc., is something that's technically feasible, I'm not aware of users that play around this, because they choose one, maybe two if they have Linux and Windows, and they stick with them because they have to develop expertise, templates, maintain them, etc., etc. So of course, we have to offer them choice, but at the end, the user want one. They will always need a combination of two things, okay, and they stick to it. So another point is that over time we had a lot of complaints about the complexity of Cluster API, how many components do we have, how they get together, especially due to the bootstrap process, which is opaque, because at the end we are talking a lot about provisioning, bootstrapping, all this fascinating thing. But what we do is that we generate a single file. And then everything happens hidden by the user. And this is another problem. So if I put together these with the obvious impact that a change like splitting provisioning will have, let me say, all across Cluster API, I think this is why I try, let's consider if there is another option. And I try to go back to the issue. So if I didn't check the specific our issue tracker for this before this discussion, but I'm looking at it every week. So since 3 or 4 years now. If I look at these, let me say, other provisioner, bootstrapper, call it as you want, they're pretty happy. They live in a repository, they can bump whatever they want, etc., etc. So they're pretty happy. We didn't get a request from other. We get a request from the initial team, which is okay because, as Jonathan explained it very well, there is this weird mix in what is the kubeadmin cloud init provision bootstrapper, which is also initial, but not really in a proper way. So, and if I try to go back to the idea of, if I try to line up and then I try to make this too short and open to discussion. So let me say, users are pretty happy with what they have. Most of the community is pretty happy. We have to solve the problem of the initial team. And what is the problem of the initial team? They want to develop a booster provider, but they don't want to be annoyed to write down all the kubeadmin part. They want just to reuse the kubeadmin code. So I'm sort of thinking maybe we can solve this problem by without having any impact on the users, They are happy. They have one provider. They have to monitor only one component. They have to deploy only one component. They have to upgrade only one component for this part. But we refactor our code, so it will be very easy to develop a new provider, and we will try to do a better job in naming. So this provider will be Kubernetes and Ignition. And then if you want to do Ignition and whatever, it is just a matter to have a good library and reuse it, because at the end you have to generate a file. So I'm coming to this angle. I'm trying to, since at least this idea of make the perfect solution didn't work well in the past, I think why we don't look for a solution which is not bad, because at the end what we will have all the provision, we will have code that can be reused. We will have a repository where every team is free to release, bump dependency as they want, and we will give users a simple choice. Pick one. You don't have to figure it out if ignition.provider.3 work with Kubernetes 1.7. They are already bundled for you. So for the user, we kind of give the best option, but technically we also make our life as a developer simpler, because we use what we have, we shape it into library, and we make them reusable. So this, let me say, I just want to solve it. I'm trying to figure it out a way to not disrupt or to not add too much complexity to the user, because honestly, we struggle even to explain to ourselves. But if you make it simple, we have to generate a file that you give to the cloud provider that spin up the machine with a Kubernetes node. We want to generate a file. Provisioning, Bootstrapper, yeah, I understand. There are technical details, but if you try to describe this to an end user, which is not a cluster API expert, or to a field engineer, we understand something that, okay, yeah, but I need, okay, whatever you want, but I need all your combination. I want that it works in the simplest way possible. If I have issue, I want to look just I already have to look at CAPI, KBK, KCP, etc., etc. Please don't give me another. So, yeah, let me say, just another approach to solve the same issue.
Yeah, thanks, Fabrizio. I understand completely, and I share completely your desire to keep things simple. I think that's a really good point. Regarding the last part, by the way, I think we can separate the user experience from the let's call it engineering under the hood, because, for example, I'm not saying we should introduce another provider for provisioner. Again, like you said, in the end, we're only generating a file, but the fact that under the hood things might be complex doesn't dictate that the user-facing part is complex. For example, I don't know if it's a good analogy, but Kubernetes can be very complex. Kubernetes itself, core Kubernetes, in terms of like the number of core components that must be running, scheduler, whatever, and control manager, and this and that. But in the end, you create a deployment pod and deployment YAML, and you apply it, and it works. So I share your desire not to further complicate the API completely. I think that if we can achieve whatever we want to solve in this workgroup without making things more complex, I'm all for it. It's a question to me whether we can actually solve the problems we're discussing without making user-breaking changes, but I'd be very happy to discover that we can. If we can, then it's a win as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I was thinking, and this is my last note today. So I was thinking, so no matter what we do, we are going to break out let me say, the cloud init part from the Kubernetes part. This is something that we have to do no matter if we expose to the user or not.
Break out in the code or in the API? Sorry.
In the code, even in the code. In the code first.
But maybe also in the API? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
No, I have a more general question because I think I'm getting Fabrizio wrong and I'm writing the wrong thing in the minutes. So I thought your original idea was to split off the ignition part and have like an entirely separate, let's call it kubeadm ignition provider, and have it live alongside the kubeadm cloud init provider. But now, when I'm following you correctly, you're talking about splitting cloud init parts out of the kubeadm provider as well, and I got you wrong.
No, I think, let me say, the end state, in my opinion, the ideal end state is that every team has its own repository. They can do stuff in according to their need, to their speed. They can pick up latest and greatest from the technology, etc., etc. And for the part that, and eventually they can reuse code, common code. So end state should be a different repository, in my opinion, because it's the best model that we have so far. How to get there? In order to allow to get there, you need to address, and this is a step that the step that I'm describing, the same step that you need to do also if you end up with many bootstrapper providers that you combine. So if you want to create this kubeadmin bootstrapper thingy, you have to go into the kubeadmin current KBK code and split up in the code, not even in the API, the part that does init join, etc., that generate the file that does init join from the part that does the cloud init point. They are not so tangled, but they are tangled today in the code. Even if you want to move them into provider, or if you would want to refactor them in a library that you use from something else, this code separation is something in the critical part of this work. So
I can see what you mean. Yeah, sorry.
So this is why I think, okay, let's start by sort out the code separation. If we got the code separation good, in a good way, and then we can reuse code without impacting user, we are getting to the end result probably 2 years before the deadline. Because, you can look at the work for changing condition. It will take 1 year, more about 2 years from when we start and to when we delete we can clean up the old code. So I don't think this will take less. Instead, if we can work in a library, it could happen in a release.
Yeah, so let's see if I got you right. And Tilo, this might also partially answer your question in case this still isn't clear. So Fabrizio, if I got you correctly, you're saying let's separate, at least at the code level, we don't know maybe about the API, but at the code level, let's separate kubeadm from Cloud Init and or Ignition, or maybe you were only referring to Ignition, but let's make these independent libraries, let's say, that can be reused within the same Go module, the same Go repository. And then once we have a library that can be imported from arbitrary Go code, we can create a separate new repository for an Ignition flavored CA-BPK, which can reuse the kubeadm part from the existing CA-BPK without us having to, in a new repository, re-implement or copy paste, whatever, the kubeadm part in order to have it work with Ignition, something like that. Is this what you meant?
Yes.
And then that's the first step. And if we manage to do that, maybe that's enough. Or maybe we need to do more stuff in order to be more orthogonal. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah? Because we have, is a way to get there incrementally, and also with the advantage of having a possible intermediate milestone that could be also the final milestone. Okay. And well, I forgot what I was saying. Because, there are we have to start trying to separate this code. Because honestly, as of today, I cannot rule out that this will impact also stuff like KCP. which is using the same types. I cannot rule it out. We have to dig into. So this is why, you know, we have to go up this mountain. Let's start from the first hill, and see if where we get a nice view, and that's okay.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand. I would like to add something related to what you said, Fabrizio. Just as my experience trying to add a different provisioner for a different OS that is neither Ignition nor Cloud Init. For me, the biggest challenge has always been the KCP controller, because I will be fine rewriting the KubeADM booster provider to use whichever OS provisioning system I have. What I don't want to do is rewrite the KCP. There is way too much experience, too much intelligence in that. That's the biggest problem. And the coupling between the API for the KubeADM booster provider and the KCP controller is what makes this challenging, right? Because I can rewrite the KubeADM booster provider, but I need to use the same API because that's the API that the KCP uses. So I don't have a solution for that. I don't want to jump into solutions, or I don't want to fight what you're proposing, Fabrizio. I do think it's a good idea, actually, and I think it does simplify it a lot for the user. I don't think having multiple controllers, if you just have multiple different OSs or OS providers, is a problem. But that KCP bootstrap provider coupling, for me, it has always been the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and you know, eye level, and I say sorry, I have to drop for another meeting, so I just say the other my last sentence, and then I drop away. I think that, you know, CapBK today is written on top of the kubeadmin config types, but it doesn't honestly care. What it does, it care about cloud configuration, init configuration, etc., etc. So today there is generics. We are way better programmers than when we started writing this code. So there are ways that we can make this pluggable, and then probably you can, like you use kubeadmin code, you can reuse the CapBK code, the KCP code. It will be a journey, but you know, separating the code at the end is what we need in both paths.
Yeah. I really like the approach because it gives us some iterations on actual code, and we will keep the architecture proposal up to date with what we're doing, but that way we can get our hands dirty and iterate and learn. So I love it. Really makes sense.
Sorry, folks, I have to drop. I will look the
awesome
recording for the
awesome you here. Thanks for the input.
One more thought, even though Fabrizio is now gone. Maybe I'm being too naive, but I think the result of the bootstrap provider, for example, kubeadmin, like the only thing it does, it creates some files, or the only features of the bootstrap, or of the, what do we call it now? The OS provisioning system it uses is creating files and running commands, I think. Like that's the main thing it does. It doesn't care about, well, the kubeadmin one uses more because it's like built for kubeinit more or less. You can create users with it, for example, and that uses, I think, the Cloud Init feature to create users. But for setting up the node, you probably only need to create files and run commands, right? So it's like abstracting away the specific format you have to, or the specific configuration file you have to create in order to create files and run commands shouldn't really be difficult. And one more thing is that, I mean, why are we doing this? Like, why do we need Ignition support? Is it only about supporting additional operating systems? Can't we just build, like, I mean, that's probably very naive, but can't we just use Cloud Init everywhere? Why would we need something else if we don't expose the features of those configuration systems, like, or OS provisioning systems. Like, for example, if Ignition supports creating partitions, then for me, the only purpose or like the only reason to use Ignition would be that I can create partitions, which I can't do with Cloud Init. But if we only use it as a library and don't expose those configuration options that these different tools provide, then there's like no real value to supporting additional OS provisioning systems, in my opinion. Like coming from a bare metal perspective, only using Ubuntu, where we only have Cloud Init for now. For us, there is no reason to switch the system because it works and it works well. But it would be nice if we could use all of the features that that Cloud Init has without like implementing it for each Bootstrap provider.
Very good point, if I may intervene. So that's one of the things that I've dedicated a lot of time to thinking about. You've raised really good points, and I think that there are two ways to diverge from where we currently are in solving that specific problem. So first of all, very briefly to answer the question, why support multiple provisioners? Yes, to support more operating systems. So if you want to support Flatcar, which is a purpose-built distro for running containers, and it is in the CNCF, et cetera, then you cannot get by without Ignition. So that's a short answer for that. Now, right now what we have is, for example, even in the kubeadm control plane type, the one that we said we don't want to touch because this is a complicated controller, it assumes that you're using Cloud Init, basically, because it embeds a Go type that has Cloud Init specific fields in it, namely disk setup. For example, there are more fields, but I use this setup because it's the one that is easy for me to remember. Now, if we want to change that, and of course that's a breaking API change, but let's say that we wanted to change that, we could change that in two different directions that are opposite. One is to abstract the whole thing and say, all we need is run commands and write files. Let's assume that any provisioner now and in the future has these capabilities and doesn't need more fields, or doesn't need more input from the user, at least at the API level, and generate whatever under the hood and everything is hunky-dory, right? That's like one option. And so we basically, if we go that route, then over time we remove or deprecate all the nitty-gritty fields like disk setup and NTP and users or whatever from the API service and do under the hood generation. That's one path. If we could do that, that would be great because simpler UX, right? So we do one breaking change 5 years from now, I don't know when, but that's like one path. The other path is exactly the opposite. Let's expose all the fields of each provisioner to the user and allow them to use the existing syntax that they know from Cloud Config or from Ignition or from cloud-based init without having to maintain a copy of the config surface of Cloud Config, for example, in Cluster API. How do we do that? So in Ignition, for example, Ignition is based in Go. So we just embed the upstream Go types in a CRD and we're done, right? And then if Ignition gets updated over time, then we just need to update and import and we're basically good. So that's the complete other extreme. Why is that good? It's more complicated, but on the other hand, it's more flexible, right? Because the user now can do whatever they want using the existing provisioning system that they might be familiar with from their non-Kubernetes workloads or non-Capi workloads at least. Now, I'll add one last comment. In my experience, users will always look for more flexibility. So if we expose a subset, let's say that we said, yeah, we only need to write files and run commands. That's fine. But I think on day 2, after introducing that change set, immediately some users will look for, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? I know it's Cloud Init. I want to do this. And they will look for basically ways to bypass inflexibilities. And if there is a way to abuse the mechanism, they will use it. I'm saying that not as a theory, that is already happening with the pre and post kubeadm commands fields that are, I know that at least in some use cases, users are injecting like arbitrary blobs of CLC config in the case of Ignition or cloud config in the case of Cloud Init, just to do arbitrary customization unrelated to bootstrapping nodes because they know it's technically possible and they need a way to achieve that. So one advantage of going the other extreme of basically exposing the whole configuration surface of the underlying provisioner is that the users can do absolutely whatever they want as if they're not even using Cluster API. And hopefully we as the Cluster API maintainers don't have to, I'm not a maintainer, but let's say that I was, we don't have to maintain like feature parity all the time with all supported provisioners. Hopefully we just import a bunch of types and basically outsource the provisioner APIs to the various to the maintainers of the various provisioners. So that's like the other extreme. Hide everything or expose everything. I think that anything in the middle, this is the tricky part, and this is where we are now.
So does it need to be semantically exposed, or is there a way to just bypass and pipe in some user configuration to the OS provision that is then merged with the config at provisioning time that is used by Cluster API? So the way I think about this is the same way you provision a VM on a cloud provider. There's cloud provider specific part, like the metadata that gets into the VM, and there's user custom data that the user can provide anything to the provisioning process. Maybe, I don't know, I'm a little ignorant in that regard towards Cluster API.
Interesting. So you're saying maybe it's enough. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. Yeah.
So you're saying maybe we don't need to care about the structure of the various provisioners. Maybe it's enough to expose a generic text field, allow them to inject whatever they want, and then merge that with the provisioning config we generate in CABPK. Maybe.
Precisely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to at least evaluating that.
Nice. All right, we're 10 minutes over. We have a lot of things to think about. I think the first step, no matter like how we implement specifics down the road, is pretty clear. We need to start hacking on the kubeadm provider and separate both implementations out of that provider as libraries, or at least as different files. So we have like the beginning of an API, even if at the beginning it's just function calls. But I think that's a good direction to go. Yeah, I don't know. Matt, Johannan, do you feel like interested in taking on that? Then I would use you as owners for that to do.
I'd be happy to help. I have a lot of catching up to do, but that's what I'm doing. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to help with anything too. So could be that and could be other stuff. Yeah.
And we have Matthew anyways for the like all of the Ignition specific part. I think Matt brings all of the experience from the Cluster API project and will have all of the knowledge and the pointers, and Johannan has done most of the or a lot of the Ignition integration, the initial Ignition integration in Cluster API, and the has thought a lot about the separation. So I think we have a tech team here of 3 folks that cover distinct areas. So I'm gonna put all 3 of you in the to-dos. That will be the first to do. Start investigating into separating those 3 things from each other that's currently intertwined in the same code base. The second to do is for me to create a calendar invite and to ping everybody and to add it to the Cluster API document and so on. And the third is the glossary, and I already worked on that, and that's already started. So that will be the to-dos from this meeting. Awesome, great to have you. Let's meet again in 2 weeks and see how far we've gone.
See you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, everybody.